could Nebuchadnezzar, which is horrible English, by the way, I should go ahead and point that out. Why could Nebuchadnezzar not sleep?
He had dreams.
Yeah, he was having dreams. That's right. He was having dreams. His mind was troubled by these dreams. But who is, and this gives us the opportunity, who is Nebuchadnezzar? We need to understand who he is as we move through the book of Daniel. So Nebuchadnezzar is who rules the Babylonian Empire from 605 to 562 BC. 43 years, by the way. 43. Now remember, the Babylonian Empire lasts 70, but he rules it 43 of the 70 years. He's the longest ruler of the empire. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is his father. Now, if you remember, now let's think about this for a second. There was the Assyrian Empire, and the Assyrian Empire was the one that kept harassing Israel. The Egyptians came up to aid the Assyrians, and they were going to go against the Babylonians until Nebuchadnezzar hears about it. Nebuchadnezzar goes and cuts them off, and of course, remember the Battle of Carchemish. Now, this is the reason why I bring this up. Because Nebuchadnezzar, his father, by the way, was actually an official in the Neo-Assyrian Empire. That's the Assyrian Empire that we're speaking of. But he was an official, but he was a high official. And so what the Assyrians do is they make his dad the king of the city of Babylon. This is how Nebuchadnezzar is even in Babylon to begin with. So his dad is the king of the city of Babylon. And when Nebuchadnezzar actually takes power, when his father is too old to do it or getting ready to pass away, he comes to power, and when he does, he begins to automatically go against the West. Because he knows what they're doing. He's not dumb. He's a great strategist. He knows what the Egyptians are going to do. Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, who had a tremendous mind for war, was never messed with. And then the Assyrians weren't going to mess with him because he was an official. But as soon as he was getting sick, Egypt saw its move. And Assyria saw its move, but Nebuchadnezzar was ready. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar actually goes against the West. Remember, they were west of Babylon. Goes against the West. Egypt's trying to build a coalition to actually go against Babylon to defeat it, but Nebuchadnezzar is actually ready. And then, of course, after, you remember the Battle of Carchemish in chapter 1 we talked about, he actually sweeps down into Judah. We have the historical record, by the way, in Old Testament, the books of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, as well as Jeremiah. We see what Nebuchadnezzar does. We see his what he does to Judah. And of course, he has a tremendous strategist when it comes to all that he was doing wartime-wise, if you will. Babylon today is the largest archaeological dig site in the world. Over 2,000 acres of it. It is the largest archaeological dig site in the world. Nebuchadnezzar himself is one that was responsible for the destruction of Solomon's temple, the taking of the temple relics, which we talked about last week as well, and of course the Israelite captivity. And that we already know. But here's a little bit more information. He built Babylon on some 2,000 acres. He placed a museum in Babylon. And as far as we know by any secular records, this is the first museum we ever talk about in the world. But he builds a museum of the Persian people inside of Babylon. He builds a bridge over the Euphrates, which at this time is unheard of. Nobody had ever attempted to build a bridge. He not only builds a bridge, but it's a bridge that's able to actually withstand militaristic transportation of troops over the Euphrates. And then he builds a grand boulevard called the Processional Way, right down the center of Babylon. And on the spring equinox every single year, a large statue of a god, the god Marduk, by the way, was paraded from the temple in the middle of town all the way down the processional way to the temple outside of town, and then brought back again. Does that sound familiar? Because if it doesn't, in a couple of weeks, when we're talking about Daniel, we're going to be seeing that whole moving of the god and so on and so forth. But this is what he's known for actually even in the secular world. So, that was during the spring equinox. Now that's where I'm going to stop there for a second, and then the other slides I have come to once we get to the dream. So any questions so far about who Nebuchadnezzar is? Or Nebuchadnezzar? Listen, that's not a great name for a son. So if you have grandchildren, don't ever name them Nebuchadnezzar. That's a little bit difficult to say and write it when you buy a house, all those papers you have to sign. Number 2. Who did the king summon?
Magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers.
Exactly right. The magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the astrologers. Now, if you remember in our sermon series towards the end of last year of the journey to find the king, when I talked about the fact that these, the Magi came from the east. Now, we don't know if they came out of Iran or modern-day Iraq. We know they came from the east. We don't know if they came from modern-day Saudi Arabia, but we know they came from the east. But understand that magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers were all considered the wise people. They were aristocracy. They were royalty inside the land. And the reason why is usually because they were the best at fooling the king. Because there was no magic. There is no enchanters. Now there's astrology, obviously. They can read the stars and things like that. But sorcery, now there is the conjuring up of evil. But the idea is they were the ones that were the David Copperfields of their day. They were the ones that were able to say things and make things happen and convince whoever the king or the queen or whoever it may be that they actually knew things. And as I said above, by the way, these people were supposed to be able to figure out and to tell the king stuff that was going on that nobody else could recognize and notice. But notice that Nebuchadnezzar gives them a claim. Or not claim, but he gives them a test that, by the way, is really, it honestly is unusual. He gives them a test. Nebuchadnezzar knows he cannot sleep. He's bothered by the dreams he's having. It's affecting the way he eats. And he's really bothered that not only does he have these dreams, but he really can't even figure out what the dreams are. And that's the reason why he gives this odd suggestion to the astrologers. Look at me, number 3. What does the king want the astrologers to do?
Tell him what he dreamed.
Tell me what I dreamed, and then tell me what it means. See, that's how I'm going to know really how good you are. Because I don't really remember the dream that well. Tell me what I dreamed, and then tell me what it means. See, that's the twist. If these people were so smart, and they were so good, and they were so connected with the little g, gods, and the stars and everything else, they should not only be able to interpret the dream for the king, but they should be able to tell the king what he dreamt. And that's how he's going to be able to tell how good they are. I want you to think about, if you will, modern-day psychics. Listen, no matter where you go in cities, no matter what big city it is, and even in some small cities, if you go, you're going to always find a place where there's a picture of a hand and an eye, where modern-day psychics were and all that. And you also find that infamous sign either for sale or for rent. Now, I want you to think about that for a second, because it's a lot like the astrologers and the enchanters and the sorcerers. If the psychic really was that good at their job, wouldn't they have known that they weren't going to do well in that place? I mean, shouldn't they have known that before? When they got ready to rent, shouldn't they have gone, wait a minute, women, I'm not going to do good here. I need to go find a new location. Hey, that's just me. But and anybody my age probably remembers the days on television of Cleo. Remember when Cleo was real big? I mean, famous. Charging $2 a minute to talk about your life and tell you what was going to happen in your future. Until, oh my heavens, it just caught the world off guard that she was lying. Really? Nonetheless. But that's the reason why I believe, not only because he was so bothered by what was going on, but he figured if you really are who you say you are, you should be able to tell me the dream, and then not only tell me the dream, but go one step further and then tell me what it means. If I tell you a dream, you can make up something it might mean, but if you can tell me the dream, now that's a different ballgame. All right, any questions about that? Any comments about that?
Well, why would a psychic spend their life scraping for nickels when they could be filthy, stinking rich in stocks, gold, you name it?
Absolutely.
I mean, they could be filthy, stinking rich.
That's exactly right.
Scrabbling for
You could be able to predict games, everything else, right? If you're real, absolutely right. But now look what Nebuchadnezzar does. What punishment does he say he's going to give them if they cannot do this job? Yeah. Hey, listen, if you tell me if I don't do this job right, that you're going to cut me to pieces and you're going to tear my house down, I mean, that's a pretty serious thing. It's a pretty serious thing, and that's exactly what it says. And by the way, we should know, and I know we've talked about this before, but I think I've even said that out of the Greco-Roman world is where this same concept comes from, but it is the Persians that are the first to do it. This is the phrase, remember, that we get in the Greco-Roman world of you're fired? And what that means if you don't do your job well, or you don't do it up to the expectations that we think, that we are going to burn your property until it's nothing but a charred remain, and we're going to kill your family, and you're going to watch us, and then when we're done, we're going to kill you. So your whole family paid that. Your whole family paid for your incompetence. Or you're lying and saying that you could do a job that you couldn't do. And so that's exactly what he says here. Listen, if you don't do what I'm asking, or if you can't do what I'm asking, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to cut you to pieces, and I'm going to tear all your house down. And so, but what happens, what reward would they get if they could?
Gifts, rewards, and great honor.
It's exactly right. Gifts, rewards, and great honors. By the way, that's a promotion, if you will. In other words, you would become closer to the king. You would be more available to the king. And the king, by the way, also, that usually means that there would be little perks that would probably come your way also. Now, General Patton, by the way, right before, when he was trying to free Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, it was one of the worst snowstorms that had actually hit Bastogne in something like 30 years. I mean, it was horrible. There was a cloud cover the entire time. It was really dreary, but it was so frigid and so cold. And Patton could not move his army quick enough because the roads were so bad. And the planes, the Allies could not come over and bomb the area to actually push the Germans back because there was so much cloud cover. They didn't want to bomb their own men. So we were kind of in a pickle. And so, and you can read this in Patton's story. Patton calls his chaplains to him. And he says, which one of you believe that you have the closest connection to God? Well, all the chaplains said they did. And we all have a connection to God. And he says, then I'll pick you. And he points to one chaplain, brings him in, and he says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to pray to God, and I want you to pray and ask God to clear the sky so that our bombers can get in. And after the bombers get in, that we'll be able to move in and free our men who are trapped now in Bastogne. Well, so he does what he's told to do. The chaplain prays, and I bet you, I just got a funny feeling that the chaplain probably prayed harder than he ever prayed in his life. But he prayed, and within 24 hours, the sky's cleared. And so the chaplain was called back to Patton, and Patton said, you are never to be farther than about 100 yards from my side. So my point is, that's exactly what was being said here. Now, I'm not saying that Patton was anything like Nebuchadnezzar. What I'm saying is that when that goes, and there's something that serious, I want you around me all the time. And that was going to be the honors that they would have received had they been able to do what they were called to do. Remember, there's great destruction if you couldn't do it, but there would be great honor. Equally great honor if you actually could. But number 6, and then after we answer number 6, we'll kind of stop for a second and see what questions. Number 6, the question is simply this. What did the astrologers conclude? Yeah. You're asking us to do something that nobody on the earth can actually do. As a matter of fact, it says exactly these words. Not a man on earth can do what the king is asking. In verse 10, by the way. And then it says, what the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, little g, the gods, and they do not live among men. So, king, you're asking us to do something that no man can do, only the gods can do, and nobody here can do it. Nobody can do it. Now, the fact is, you have to give them credit for one thing here, and that was the fact that they said, no man can do this. It wasn't like, well, Bill used to be able to do it, but he's dead now. It's nothing like that at all. No man can do this. Only the gods can do this. You're asking an impossible task. So at least they were honest here. That's the one thing we have to give them credit for. They were honest. But only the gods. Now, they were getting close. It was a little g with an S. They were a little bit close. Only a God can do this. They don't live with us. Now, let's go ahead and stop for a second before we go any further. Any questions or comments? Now, this is one of the few times that we're going to find honesty, by the way, in this area. But it is important that we see this.
Well, it is, but it's a big setup because of what they have just said. So that the person who comes on the scene later, there's never going to be any doubt in Nebuchadnezzar's mind, but before it said they were 10 times better. I think in his estimation, they just shot from 10 to 100.
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I want you by my side now. And by the way, the reward does come.
They were all given a shot.
That's exactly right. Every one of them. And so you're right. It is a great setup. And by the way, I'm sure this wasn't accidental. And by the way, look at number 5. What's the purpose of history? So that we can see this. So that we can understand how God's plan moves. Now, all right, so number 7. When the king became angry, what did he order done? The execution. The execution, by the way, of all the wise men in Babylon, you bunch of losers. Every single one of you are going to pay exactly what I said. Absolute power, by the way, leads to absolute what? Corruption. Absolute power leads to absolute corruption. We see that with no term limits in Congress. Let's move on. When they are not able to produce the results that any real seer, if you will, of God should have been able to do, the king figured, I might as well rid the place of every single one of you. Because eventually I might find somebody, but I'm going to go ahead and clean the slate and get rid of every single one of you, and I'm going to find somebody real who's able to do this. Because there is a problem here, and you can't help me. You can't do the things that you said there is. But there's a real problem with this too. Number 8. Who were among the wise men of Babylon? That's right. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were all part of the wise men, the people that were actually there.
But without the previous setup,
Absolutely.
if Daniel and them would have stood up first, the other wise, I could have done that if you'd asked me.
Well, some theologians believe that Daniel and them weren't even brought into this until this part. Because that's the reason why he says, wait a minute, well, let's go ahead and look at this question.
Yeah, they weren't.
Right. How did Daniel speak to Arioch?
Wisdom and tact.
Wisdom and tact. Wisdom and tact. And Daniel asks, what did Daniel ask the king for?
Time.
Because we ask, why has this order been sent out? Well, because, I'm using my own words here, by the way. Well, because nobody can answer the king's question. Well, if you give me some time, maybe we can. So my point is, they weren't part of the original group that went before the king. Now, there are several reasons possibly for this. As a matter of fact, depending on the theologian that you read, several reasons for it. One, they're Jewish. So even though they're part of the king's workmen or the people in the king's service, that there's still limitations because they're not 100% Babylonian. They're not Persian. They're not anything like that. So maybe they weren't involved because of that. It could have been because they were young. And they figured they didn't have the wisdom that naturally is normally earned in time and experience. So that with wisdom and tact, he approaches Arioch and says, why? Why has this been sent out? What's this order from? So number 10 then, it says, what did Daniel ask the king for? We just answered that. Time that he might interpret the dream. But Daniel, in essence, is asking the king to give him a chance to interpret the dream for the king. Because Daniel already had a plan, knowing that God, big G, can reveal these things. And so he's going to go before God. And then let's go ahead and look at number 11, and we'll answer several of these, and we can kind of wrap them in together. Who did Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah go to for help?
God.
They pleaded to God. And by the way, they pleaded for mercy from the God from heaven concerning the mystery. Now, by the way, we go back to that Greek word. Now, this is Hebrew here, but it's the same in the Greek in the fact of what it is, the mysterion, and that is that which is unknown to us. So they plead to God they said, let this mystery be revealed. Let us have this mystery. And then number 12, what happened that very night? But it goes to Daniel. And that's really important for us. The mystery is revealed to Daniel in a vision. The Lord answered his prayers, not only just Daniel's prayers, but the prayers of the young men, because all 4 of these young men would have prayed because they knew who God was, they knew what God was capable of doing, and they knew that only God could tell them not only what the dream was, but what the dream meant. And so they go to God, and God responds to them. And by the way, like you said, everything was being set up, and so number 13, what did Daniel immediately do when he found when the vision was revealed?
Praise God.
He praised God. He praised the God of heaven. All praise and honor always goes to God. And that's exactly, by the way, what Daniel did. Daniel took the opportunity to share with the king what was able, but he gives God all the honor and he gives God all the praise. And here's the problem. In today's times, and no raising of the hands, just think about this, please, for a moment, if you will. And that is this. How many times, all of us in our life, do we go before God with a sincere request? And by the way, it eventually happens. It's responded to. We actually receive whatever we've asked for, whether that is help us to get through this issue, or help us to understand why, or Lord, I just don't know how I'm going to pay this bill and something comes in the mail. How many times do we ask God for something, and when he does, we may take a second and go, whew, God's good, but that we actually go back and praise God for what he has done. How many times do we also let everybody know, I asked for this and look at what God has done, so that God gets the glory and gets the praise. Now, once again, I don't want an answer, but it really is something that we really need to think about and that we need to ponder, because, when we don't get a response the way that we think we should, when we don't get an answer the way we want it to be answered, we're really quick to wonder why God didn't do it. But we often struggle with going back to God and saying, man, God, you really are good to me, and praising him and thanking him for what he does. Just something for us to really think about. Because Daniel does this, and of course, I promise you, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego all do it as well. They all praise God for the fact that they went before God and they begged God in mercy for his mercy, and to show them this, that they might be able to not only save their own lives, but also to be able to save the lives of others. And in doing so, let's go ahead and jump into Matthew for a second and think about that. Let your light shine, that people may see your good deeds and praise who? Your Father in heaven. And by the way, we're going to see here that Daniel makes sure that God gets the credit. And so what a wonderful opportunity to go before the king of the largest empire in the world right now, at this point in time, and when it's all said and done, to be able to say, hey, King, I want you to know it was the God of heaven who did this. All right, so we'll go and stop there, and let's go ahead and look at number 14. Any questions or comments? Okay. Number 14. Who did Daniel ask Arioch to take him to? King Nebuchadnezzar. That's exactly right. King Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel wants to plead the case before the king. Daniel remembers that the king was impressed with the knowledge and with the wisdom of these young Israelites. He was impressed by it. As a matter of fact, we remember 10 times more. Now, was it exactly 10 times? We don't know. It doesn't matter. The idea was that the king was very impressed with this group, because they were head and shoulders, as far as knowledge-wise, above and beyond everybody else. So he remembered that they were impressed with that, and he thought that God would also preserve them, and he knew that God would preserve them, and this would be the opportunity that Daniel would be able to reveal to the king who Yahweh was, and to be able to demonstrate the power of his God, that he has power that no other God, including all the gods of Babylon, do not have. And what a way to be able to do it. You got Nebuchadnezzar, who, by the way, is deeply bothered, sickened, by the way, it says in the Hebrew, sickened by whatever this dream was, that it was keeping him up. We could even go down now today, knowing how we go through life, probably had anxiety over it, but was keeping him up, not able to really eat. His life was very anxious. He didn't know really what the dream was. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew that it was keeping him up, and it was really bothering him. And what a way to be able to go in and say, hey, let me introduce you first to who Yahweh is. Remember, that's what the Jews called him at this time, who Yahweh is, and let me show you that he has power that no other God has, including, by the way, all the gods you serve. Number 15. What does Daniel say when the king asks if Daniel is able to tell him what the dream means?
No man can.
Yeah. I can't do it. By the way, here's the other beautiful part of his honesty. He tells him, no wise man, no enchanter, no magician, no diviner can explain to the king the mystery that you're asking us to explain. No man can actually do that. Number 16, who does Daniel tell the king the meaning of the dream can come from? But there is a God who is in heaven, who reveals all mysteries. Now, I could almost imagine, now it just in my mind, I could almost imagine that as Daniel is standing there and the king saying, so can you tell me what the dream means? Can you tell me what the dream is? And can you tell me what the dream means? And Daniel then says, no, I can't. And by the way, there is no wise man. In other words, the king, for a split second, now imagine this in your mind, for a split second, the king believes he's about to hear the same thing that these other yahoos just said. None of us can do this. There's no man on the earth. And by the way, Daniel is saying that. But he's not yet heard the follow-up of what Daniel is saying. No wise man, no enchanter, no magician, no diviner, or diviner, however you want to say that, can explain the king the mystery he is asked about. But There is a God in heaven who reveals all mysteries. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar unashamedly, by the way, living in a foreign land, under, by the way, the oppression because he has been taken into servitude. He tells him unashamedly there is a God in heaven who can reveal to him everything that no man could ever do. Daniel fully makes known that this is only done by his God, Yahweh. Not by the God of anything to do in Babylon, but by my God from back home. He's the only one that can do this. Now, by the way, what we're about to talk about, we're going to see a symbol. We know that. We're going to talk about what it is and so on and so forth. But as we get into it, remember what we're seeing here is we're seeing a version of apocalyptic style writing. We're seeing a symbol, but it represents something that's coming in history. We just talked about all this before in Revelation. But let's go ahead and look at this and understand what is actually going on. Because obviously here, it's not a real statue per se. This is a vision. This is a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has actually had. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about that. So let's look at number 17. What did the king see in his dream? Yeah, a large statue, by the way. Not only a large one, but an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. Now, we're going to go through about 18 through 22. What was the head of the statue made of? Pure gold. What was the chest and the arms made of? What was the belly and the thighs made of? Bronze. And what were the legs made of? Iron. And what were the feet made of? Partly iron and partly clay. And the fact is, listen, there's a couple of different things to see here. One, you've heard me say this before when we talked about our study in Genesis. I have advocated always, and always will, that, when God created Adam and Eve, the Bible is very clear, God created them perfect. They were using 100% of their brain. They were perfect. And from the days of Adam and Eve, we have done nothing but digress in our intelligence. So even when we look at this a little bit, and I'm just giving you a comparison here, if you notice pure gold, silver, bronze, iron and clay, we go from something that is very valuable to something that is not all that valuable. That's what we see here in a little bit. But strength beyond value. All right, so I wanted to keep that in mind so that we can understand that. So the top kingdom starts with gold, the most expensive of the metals, and we're going to come to that here in a second as well. Then silver, then bronze, then iron, and then feet mixed with bronze and clay. With iron and clay. And by the way, iron, ore, and clay do not mix. They can be in the same thing, but it's not like they attach to one another in any way, shape, or form, which, by the way, automatically shows a weakness. The greatest kingdom starts, and then it begins to digress. Now, what happened to the statue before we actually get ready to look at what the statue, a picture of it?
The feet were smashed.
Exactly right. The feet were smashed by what?
A stone that was removed not by human
Stone
hands.
cut out of the mountain without hands.
Exactly right. A stone not cut by human hands. That actually strikes the statue in the feet of iron and clay and smashes them. And then the iron and clay and the bronze and the silver and the gold were broken into pieces at the same time, and they became like chaff on a threshing floor. By the way, these are verses 34 and 35. Like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer, and the wind swept them away without leaving any trace. Now, I want to make sure that we understand that's not literally saying it's like as if they never existed. That's not the case at all. All we find today of those kingdoms are ruins. We find the ruins. As a matter of fact, we have the opportunity to study those ruins, and from the study of those ruins, we can learn a lot of things. But it was a rock that was not cut by human hands. We have empires that were made by humans. We have empires that were cut by human hands, if you will. But this rock was not. So this statue, by the way, says what happened to the rock when it struck the statue. We've already talked about that. But it became what? A huge mountain, by the way, that filled the whole earth. Now, let's look at this, and then we're going to go ahead and pull up a statue, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about each one of these things. Number 25. What had God given King Nebuchadnezzar?
Everything.
But King Nebuchadnezzar wasn't an Israelite. But so you're saying that God gave him dominion and power?
Yes.
Absolutely. And by the way, not only gave him dominion and power, but gave him might and glory. See, God's the one that did that. In your hands, this is what it reads, by the way, in your hands he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air, wherever they live. He has made you ruler over them. Now think about that for a minute.
It reminds me of Adam.
The same way that we rule the animals. See, when we were created to have dominion over the earth. And what I mean by rule the animals, not like, hey, bird, go over there, and it does. But the idea, yeah, not like that. That's Dr. Doolittle. That's not, yeah. But the idea that we have control over the animals, and the fact that if I want to go out and kill a gazelle, I can kill a gazelle and eat it. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Dominion just simply means I have power over. Yeah. So, all right, so let's go ahead and pull this up, and let's look at this for a second. I know it's a little bit small, but and that was the statue with its arms crossed and stuff. I have no idea, but hey, at least it gives you this. So let's go ahead and talk about these kingdoms, because number 26, it says, what was the head of gold?
The king.
Yeah, it was King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, in his Babylonian Empire, this is the first of the empires that's being spoke about here. And you need to know, once again, the head represented Nebuchadnezzar because he was the first of the 5 that were going to actually come. And it's from 605 to 605 BC to 539 BC. That's how long this empire lasts. And by the way, in that period of time, once again, 43 years is actually Nebuchadnezzar. And then there's a few other kings that happen after that, ending, of course, with the one that we call Belteshazzar. But it's actually, there's a different name in secular history, but it is the same name, Belteshazzar, when it comes to the biblical history. All right, so that is the very first one. That is the Babylonian Empire. And then number 27, what does the chest and the arms represent? The chest and the arms of silver represent.
Second kingdom.
Yes, the second kingdom, which, by the way, would be inferior to the first kingdom. Inferior in this, and by the way, inferior in what? Because the Persian Empire was pretty mighty. Well, inferior in the fact of what it had in wealth. But the Medo-Persian Empire was established by Cyrus in 539 BC, and it went from 539 BC to 331 BC. Quite the run, as a matter of fact. And by the way, the Persian Empire was rather large and rather powerful. Now, we have in scriptures that Darius, who was the Mede, but this is once again a reminder for you in secular history, it wasn't about Darius the Mede, because Darius and Cyrus both go in. But remember, Darius was a Mede. He was a Midianite. And so he was a Mede, and the Medes were just allowed to be part of it, but Cyrus is the one who is of the Persian Empire, and Cyrus is the conqueror. So Cyrus is the one that we all know. So Cyrus the Great is actually the first great leader. Once again, that's 539 that begins. That's the end of the Babylonian Empire. But from 539 to 331 BC actually is the Persian Empire. Let's just call it that. But what we do need to know is that during the entire reign, or during the entire duration of the Persian Empire, every single country they conquered and every human being that lived in the Persian Empire had to pay their taxes in silver. It was unusual, because up to this point, all other ones actually used gold, but they used silver. Now, I don't know why, to be honest, but they did. But they paid it in silver. Number 28. What does the belly and the thighs of bronze represent? Yes. The third empire, the third kingdom, which is the Greek Empire or the Grecian Empire, which is established thoroughly, if you will. When I say thoroughly, I mean by Alexander the Great. However, I think I have more information inside here. Let me just cut through a couple of things. Let's do this. Yeah, let me go ahead and do this. So we got the Medo-Persian Empire, so the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire actually starts around 800 BC. 800. Now that's, by the way, what I mean by it starts, it means it exists. It's not a powerhouse. It's not conquering the world. The Grecian Empire or the Greek Empire are known at this time as city-states. So in other words, you have the Athenians in the Greek Empire. They're not one nation. They're city-states. So we have the Athenians. You have the Macedonians that are a little bit north. You have the Arcadians. But then you had the greatest of all of them, and they were who? The Spartans. Yes, Leonidas and his 300. The Spartans out of all the Grecians, were by far the most ferocious warriors. And the reason why is I want you to think about this for a second, because I'm going to go ahead and tell you this, because it's important in history to know a little bit about the Grecian Empire. The Spartans, by the way, every young man had to be a warrior. Everyone. So you were born at the age of 5, you were removed from your parents, and you were trained from the age of 5 to be a warrior all the way up until the age of 18. At the age of 18, you became a warrior, and you were a warrior for life. Until you either died, at some point I imagine there was maybe a little bit of retirement, but you pretty much fought anytime Sparta needed you. Every single man was a professional soldier. And by the way, that's what made Sparta so much different, and that's what made Sparta, you like that? That's what made Sparta, they had a lot of flatulence in that country. But that's what made Sparta so strong compared to everybody else. So, when they went to war, if Acadia and all of them, remember the Greeks were free people, so if they had to go to war, if Acadia had to go to war, or the Athenians had to go to war, they basically had a call up, like we would call a draft. They had a call up, the men had to go, but they left their fields, they left their business, they left their families, whatever, and they went and fought. And they weren't always as successful as these people that might be 25 years old, but had been training for combat since they were 5. And by the way, believe it or not, odd, but in order to be a Spartan warrior, by a certain age, which was usually 10, you had to go by yourself out and you had to kill wild animals and bring them back. And each wild animal, the more ferocious the animal, the more, quote-unquote, like you and I would call accolades or rank or privilege you got. And that's at the age of 10.
Just like in the movie.
In a sense. Now, I don't know if it was really a skinny wolf like you see in the movie. But yes, that was true. But imagine sending out your 10-year-old son to go kill an animal. Now, I know that sounds, wow, that's a little bit rough, but imagine what David did. He killed lions and bears protecting the flock of sheep. And he did it with a slingshot. All right, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now, the reason why I bring this also up is that when the Persians hated the Greeks, when the Persians were actually trying to take over all of that area, they had gone all the way over to the Asia Minor area, which is all Turkey, and they wanted to cross over the peninsula into Greece, but only the Spartans. Now, the Grecians got together, but really it was the Spartan 300. Now, and remember, if you watch the movie, as we talked about, obviously all that is, there's about probably 85% that's fictional on that. But the Spartan 300 actually trapped them in a place called Thermopylae, and Thermopylae was a really narrow pass, so it didn't matter that he had 35,000 men going against them. They had to go. They could only send in at one time up to about 50 people wide. So it didn't matter if you had 35,000; you could only send 50 at a time, and the Spartans were killing them 50 at a time. So, but they eventually lose because they're actually somebody actually shows the Persians how to get around them. They're ambushed and they're killed. But because of what happened at Thermopylae, it affected the writing of the Constitution in the United States in 1781. Just understand that. It leads back into where we are even today. So that's the Greek Empire. Something to keep in mind. So it's at its zenith when Philip the Great is actually the leader. It's getting really, really strong. Macedonia is taking over all of Greece. But Philip the Great is actually assassinated by one of his own men. That's Alexander's dad. Alexander, of course, then becomes immediate ruler. And from 338 to 323 is when it's actually at its greatest peak. But then, like I said, he dies kind of a mysterious death. And then all the Greek Empire is divided up among his 4 generals, which we talked about that last week as well. All right. And by the way, does anybody know who Alexander's personal teacher was all of his life? Aristotle. All right. Roman Empire is the next one. Romulus starts it in 800 BC. Remember, Remulus and Romulus were twins. And they fought to see who was going to be the leader of each, who was going to be the alpha male. Romulus wins. That's the reason why the Roman Empire is called Rome, because of Romulus. 800 BC. It's at its peak, though, at 46 BC. From 46 BC to 476 AD is when the Roman Empire is at its peak. Now, 476 is when the Western Empire falls. And the feat of iron and clay is the weakness and the split of the Roman Empire when it goes east-west. And the divided Roman Empire was extremely weak, much weaker than a united one. The last time it was united was under Constantine, if you remember, at that time. But and it was infighting that caused the Roman Empire to actually fall. It collapsed on itself because emperors began to fight back and forth. Generals began to vie for more power and thought they should be the emperor. And the borders began to expand. The Roman military could no longer put out enough military men. They couldn't conscript enough people. So they started hiring mercenaries in the countries in which they were taken. And those mercenaries were easily up for bribes. And so the borders were constantly being violated by the outside. And so eventually they have to continue to bring their borders in. And as they do that with so much infighting, the Western Empire finally falls. And when it falls, it's not long. Actually, it's about another maybe 800 to 900 years before the Eastern Empire falls. And when the Eastern Empire falls, it actually becomes known as the Byzantine Empire, which I thought I had that up there as well, but maybe I didn't type that in. But it was called the Byzantine Empire. When the Eastern Empire no longer exists, it becomes the Byzantine Empire, or Byzantium. That's what it actually becomes. So by the way, that's important to know because it's part of what the vision was. Rome is, like I said, so let me get to, I think I typed it inside here. Yeah, I typed it inside here in your number 30. In your number 30, the fourth kingdom would be divided, a divided empire, the Roman Empire. Remember, in the Roman Empire, the eastern capital was where? Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. But the Hagia Sophia, which was the actually built by Constantine himself, was the largest Christian church in the world until it was taken over by the Byzantine, became the Byzantine Empire, and then it was turned to the mosque. But today, it's not a mosque or a church, it's just a museum of what it's always been. But that was built in the 300s AD. Now, so the Western Empire, the Eastern Empire was in Constantinople, and the Western Empire's base was where? Or the headquarters, or the capital, was in Rome. Now, number 31, and then this is where, so 31, what does the mixture of iron and clay represent? It's exactly right. That the kingdom is going to be partly strong, partly brittle, but the people will be the mixture, and they will not remain united. And when the mixture separates, it becomes extremely weak. Extremely weak. A divided Rome was a weak Rome. As a matter of fact, history has proven that the Roman Empire collapsed in itself and imploded. It was not because of the strength of an outer enemy. It imploded in on itself. In other words, as it does, all the allegiance of the people was beginning to be divided constantly between leaders. And so they began to fight each other. They began to constantly go against each other. And there was no defense for them. So as they were fighting each other, the enemies came from the outside, but there was no place for anybody to fight. And so eventually, they just simply collapsed. Does that sound like a familiar scenario? Yeah. It sounds like a familiar scenario. Remember, history has a reason or has a way to repeat itself. That's why number 5 is so important. What is the purpose of history? That we wake up and that we recognize where people failed, and because of that, we should not do the same thing. All right, any questions? I know we covered a lot of information there. Any questions or comments? If you're not a history lover, I'm sorry, but it is part of the statute. We need to understand this stuff. What's going on? Questions? Okay, all right. All right, now, number 32. What kind of kingdom will God set up? An eternal kingdom that will never be destroyed and will never be left or will never be left to another people. It'll crush all those other kingdoms, and in the end, it will endure forever. Yes.
So back to
Nebuchadnezzar? So Babylon or Nebuchadnezzar?
Babylon.
Okay.
That's the town where the story of Babel came from. When did that happen?
Oh, Babel happened in Genesis, long before this.
So they already knew that story.
Oh, yeah,
People
yeah.
from that area.
Well, and remember, Babel was not actually about Babylon. Babel was at the Tower of Babel, and the reason why it was called the Tower of Babel, because it was in the plain, but the reason why it was called the Tower of Babel is because that's where the language was confused. And so, remember, everybody spoke one language after the flood. And as one people speaking one language, they were uniting against God. And so God confuses the language. And he could have destroyed them, but he didn't. So he confuses the language. So in other words, we were all speaking English, and all of a sudden, I'm talking to you, you're speaking French, I'm speaking English, I don't know what you're talking about. So it was Babel, and that's what they call it.
Was it the same area?
Yeah, it was the basic same area, the Middle East.
And it was a very long time before.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Genesis chapter 11, as a matter of fact, or 10, in that area. So absolutely, this is way before this point. Absolutely.
Is that why there's so many different languages in those regions?
It's exactly right. That's why we have the different languages in the world. Because after Babel, what the people did in Babel, because remember, God had said after the fact that they were to scatter and that they were to be fruitful and multiply, and they never scattered. They just stayed in one area. But when the languages were confused, I found everybody that spoke English, and we all said, let's go over here and get away from these people that we have no clue what they're saying, because we don't know if they're talking about us or they're making a plan to come against us. And so people began to spread out. So that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
Like our clientele that we have in the hospitals, several of them speak 3, 4, 5 languages.
Right. Exactly right.
From Africa and Middle East.
Well, remember, almost every nation in the world teaches, they automatically teach English. You have to know English because it's the business language of the world. Because everybody deals with the West. And the West, the main leaders in the West as far as trade is is the United States, Britain, and Australia. So everybody speaks English. Everybody I ever met overseas, no matter what they spoke, no matter what country they were from, they always could speak English. It was broken, but they could still speak English enough to communicate with you. Say that again? No, that's exactly right. They did not. But the same as whenever we were in Spanish countries, we had a lot of people that could speak Spanish, and we never let them know either. So they could hear conversations, and they'd lean over and say, "This is what they're saying," and you just smiled and just thought, "Yeah, okay, we're watching you." Yeah.
And a lot of people regret.
Yeah.
Or they resent having to learn English.
Exactly.
My grandfather, who was a businessman, was bombed by the Americans during the war, refused to speak English.
Right.
He refused to learn it.
And it's like a lot of families over here that were German Americans refused to ever speak German because of the war. Right. Any other questions or comments?
Well, just an informational one. At the confusion of languages, there were not many hundreds. There were just a few.
Yes. And then we have variations of each now.
Right.
Absolutely.
A lot of dialects.
Exactly right. Or in the Greek dialecta. We have a lot of dialects in the United States, right? I speak English, and so do people from Alabama. They speak a different English than me, though. Yes, sir.
Is there any theologian opinion or secular history opinion on why Nebuchadnezzar was so out to get his wise men or his...
Because, you mean like during the situation when he wanted to know this?
I mean, he's pretty much, in his mind, he's going to start over with his inner circle.
Well, the idea, I think, and by the way, I think we see this even in modern history, maybe not necessarily the killing of you, but in modern history, if I had you as one of my main advisors, and you can't give me sound information, or you can't give me an answer that I'm looking for, I can find somebody who can. And that's really what's being said here. Because there was such great distress that was brought on him about this dream, if you can't do what you say that you can do, and that is delve into the world of the dreams and visions and all that, if you can't help me with this, I'm going to find somebody else. But I'm going to also show people that there's a punishment for those who say they can do a job and can't.
Right, but I mean, what I'm saying is it almost is like it's almost like he's basically, I mean, sure it's the hand of God in his heart, but and lining up the dominoes so that everything all the way that they fell. But I mean, it's almost like he's.
As an American, this is a hard concept to grasp. Are you familiar with dictatorships?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you just off whoever you want to.
That's right. It's my choice.
Well, yeah, and so as an American, this is a hard concept.
Well, and this is even monarchies. I mean, all the way up until, the 1800s or so. Monarchies is off to whoever they wanted to as well.
Right, and so
Yeah.
in order to understand this, you have to understand how the mind works, and it has absolute power.
Because it leads to absolute corruption.
You know, it's power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is hard for us to get a hold of, because no one in this room has ever exercised absolute power.
Like, for example, in England, there was the divine right of the king that they lived by under the I don't know if it was the Tudors or anyhow, but nonetheless, they had the divine right of the king, and the divine right of the king is I answer to God only. So if I decide, you know what, Dallas, I don't like your hat, I'm gonna kill you, God's okay with that, and they really believe that God's okay with it. Yes.
Are you asking if, because you never showed, we don't know if you showed the case of the ordinance group. So are you asking, like, was he tormented? Is that what brought him?
I think I'm asking, basically, is there any theologian's opinion on why he was so out to clean the slate of his?
No. I've never read any reasoning other than the fact that the idea is that as a king or as a leader of a country like this, if I want something, it should happen, and if it doesn't, I'll just get the people that I can.
Obviously, he's the ruler of
Yeah.
a great kingdom.
Right.
He's not an ignorant man.
No. Exactly right.
And he understands that the people surrounding him are very important.
Absolutely.
So here he is, in my mind, they must have done something for him to put up this etiquette. That, hey,
Yeah. I've never read anything written about it. Yes.
I mean, isn't it just possible that he's throwing
maybe
Yep.
he's been without sleep.
I mean, you know,
Sleep, hungry, angry. Yeah. Okay, so I have one more joke for you before we close out. I don't know. So this husband and wife have been going to church, and the husband wakes up one morning and he just sits in his chair and he's sitting down with coffee, and his wife said, well, you going to get up and get ready? And he goes, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I'm not going to go to church today. And here's his 3 reasons. He says, people are extremely cold at that church. None of them like me in any way, shape, or form, and I just don't want to go today. And so his wife looks at him and says, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you need to go. 1, the people are very warm. I find them to be warm. And there are a few people that do like you. And you have to do the sermon. Let's have a prayer. Yes.
Remember, sign up sheet for Sunday.
Sign up sheet for Sunday for the food, right? Okay. Don't forget to sign up if you've yet to sign up for the fellowship dinner on Sunday. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for all that you give us, and we ask for your blessing. We ask for your guidance always. And we always thank you, Father, for the opportunity to explore history that we find in Scripture and see how the history shows us and sets the stage of not only who God is and what he is capable, but that we can then rest in the fact that he is the same God today that he was then. And what a peace that can bring us. But help us, Father, continue in our discipleship as we continue to learn, as we continue to strive to go deeper in our relationship with you and in our knowledge. And in doing so, then we are able to defend what we know because we know what we believe and we know why we believe it. It's a big thing when we know both. So bless us, be with us, and guide us. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.